لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعليهم أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. I welcome you back. It is lesson number 19 of Safinat al-Naja, the ship of salvation. This is a class level 1 in Shafi fiqh. And of course, we have focused on Kitab al-Tahara, Kitab al-Salah. Now we proceed on to Kitab al-Zakah. And the topics in this particular lesson will cover the 6 types of wealth on which Zakah is owed, the Zakah of Eid al-fitr, the 8 categories of Zakah recipients. Now, it is important to bear in mind that this text was written as an introduction, as a primer in Shafi'i jurisprudence. And just like before, there's very little detail about the individual concepts. And this becomes even more true with regards to the rest of the book. So Zakah, fasting, Hajj and Umrah is more of an introduction and an overview as opposed to a detailed lesson of those particular topics. And Kitab al-Tahara and Salah has been given much more detail than the remainder of the book, wherein we can practically look at it in a few pages. So obviously, this is not intended to be your end of your journey, being a level 1 study. So I would highly recommend that we continue and perhaps pursue books like the Matan al-Ghaya wa Taqrib and the Umdat al-Salik, as well as other texts in the Shafi'i ladder of study, which are of course all available on SeekersGuidance.org, for which you can register for free as per normal, bi'idhnillah. Many of the courses have already been completed and recorded, so it is readily available for you, bi'idhnillah. So we commence inshallah ta'ala with this overview, faslun fima tajibu fihi zakah, in this section that deals with those elements of wealth upon which Zakah is obligatory. Al-amwal allati talzamu fiha zakatu sittatu anwa'. The types of wealth in which Zakah is obligatory are 6. النعم والنقدان والمعشرات وأموال التجارة وواجبها ربع عشر قيمة عروض التجارة والركاز والمعدن. Now, this will be dealt with in a moment. Just a footnote here. إلى هنا انتهى ما كتبه مؤلف سفينة النجاة رحمه الله تعالى. It is at this point at which the author had stopped writing this particular book. It is unclear to me who completed the book, but be that as it may, the person who completed the book follows in the same style as the author, rahimahullah ta'ala. So with that, we continue bi'idhnillah to analyze this particular segment of text. Excuse me. فصل الأموال التي تلزم فيها الزكاة 6 أنواع. The types of wealth upon which zakah is obligatory are 6. النعم, which is livestock. والنقدان, the 2 types of money. So this is money. The 2 types is referring to gold and silver, but we'll speak about that in a moment. وَالْمُعَشَّرَاتُ, as well as crops. And then we carry on from there. Number 4 is أموال التجارة وواجبها ربع عشر قيمة عروض التجارة. Trading stock, wealth acquired from business, in which 2.5% of the value of the commodity should be discharged. And then number 5, والركاز والمعدن, number 6. So number 5 is treasure troves, and ma'din is mines. So these are the 6 types of wealth upon which zakah is obligatory. Again, livestock, cash, crops, wealth acquired from business, in which 2.5% of the value of the commodity should be discharged, treasure troves, and mines. Now, looking at the footnotes to assist us in navigating this very brief mention of the six types of obligatory wealth, or rather, six types of wealth upon which zakah is obligatory, we start with the first footnote. The wealth upon which zakah is compulsory are six types. Number one, zakah is wajib on every Muslim, male, female, adult, or child who has possessed a zakah payable amount for 1 lunar year. So, this is the basic requirement of zakah. Zakah is obligatory on wealth and not upon the person. So, as opposed to other matters of ibadat like salah, for example, it does not depend on the person being mukallaf. Rather, it depends on the wealth itself. So, when somebody has possessed a zakah payable amount, what is a zakah payable amount? This amount is referred to as the nisab, the minimum zakatable amount. So, the threshold of nisab, for example, with regards to gold, is 84.48 grams, right? So, if you look at that amount of gold, then basically what we do for cash, to cut a very long story short, what we do for cash is we measure the equivalent cash amount for that amount of gold, and then we take that cash amount as the nisab. So for South African rands, for example, it amounts to approximately 100,000 rand. In terms of US dollars at this present time, so this is of course why it is something that needs to be addressed in the current context, because I'm saying 100,000 rands now, but by the time you watch this video, it may have changed depending on the fluctuation of the currency or the price of gold. So again, we're always going to go back to the asl, and the asl here is the gold in grams, actually originally in dinars, but it was measured by the scholars in grams. So we look at that amount of gold, basically 85 grams of gold. What is the cash equivalent of that amount? And then that would be considered the nisab. So again, if we take the figure of 100,000 rand, and let's say it is 10,000 US dollars, then if a person possesses 10,000 US dollars for a year without that money fluctuating in such a way that it dips beneath the threshold of 10,000 US dollars, then after a lunar year passes on that money, 2.5% of that entire amount, not just the minimum amount, but the entire amount would be payable in zakah. So this is the basic concept of zakah. So now we proceed further bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So number one says livestock. So in footnote number 2, zakah on livestock is limited to camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. Zakah is wajib when one has owned, number 1, a zakah payable number of livestock. Number 2, for 1 full lunar year. And number 3, it has been grazing, or rather the farmer has been grazing them on unowned open range pasturage for the entire year. There is no zakah on cattle that were fed fodder or grain, only even if they have otherwise been grazed. So there are, of course, much more details. There are many details in relation to this particular chapter of livestock. But for the most part, living in a post-industrial world, or in a world going through the fourth industrial revolution, for the most part, the overwhelming majority of Muslims are not going to be affected by this particular chapter. But if you are within the field of agriculture, you're living in an agrarian society, then of course it would be required to study this particular chapter from a more advanced work like Umdatul Salik or the Minhaj of Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, along with one of its shuruhat. So that said, at least now we know that if you are a farmer and you have livestock, then you may be liable to pay zakah depending on the circumstances of your livestock. So how many heads of livestock do you have? For how long do you have them? And then, of course, how do you graze them? So with that said, we continue, inshallah ta'ala, with the next type of wealth, which is money or naqdan. So footnote number 3 states, zakah is wajib for anyone who has possessed the zakah payable amount of gold or silver for 1 lunar year. The nisab, or the minimum that necessitates zakah for gold, is 20 mithqals, which amounts to 84.8 grams. there's a more precise number as well, on which 2.5% is due, and for silver it is 200 dirhams or 594 grams, on which 2.5% is due. While there is a considerable difference between the value of the gold and silver zakah minimum, the minimum for monetary currency should correspond with that of silver, since it is more beneficial for the poor. Now, this particular note here, this final note, this is a matter of difference of opinion among the Shafi'i, or rather among contemporary Shafi'i scholars, because of the difference, the tremendous difference between the value of gold and the value of silver, which was not necessarily the case. In fact, it wasn't the case earlier on in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Khulafa ar-Rashidun. Many contemporary Shafi'i scholars, including my late teacher Mufti Taha Karan rahimahullah ta'ala, they opine that one should not be using the silver zakatable amount or the silver nisab, but rather the nisab of gold to calculate the nisab of money. Why? Because even though, technically speaking, if we were to go according to the nisab of silver, it would be more beneficial for the poor because more people would pay zakah. However, if you consider the amounts that I mentioned earlier on, currently the nisab of silver would be sitting at less than 10,000 rand, whereas the nisab of gold is 100,000 rand approximately. So that's a huge difference. However, understanding the bab of zakah would teach us that zakah is meant to redistribute wealth from the rich or the affluent to the poor or the less affluent. If we go according to the silver nisab standard, then what we will actually end up with is that many people who are not actually affluent, they have a bare minimum savings, they too will be paying zakah and thus putting them at a disadvantage. So for this reason, to be more advantageous to all and sundry, not only to those who receive the zakah, but those who give the zakah as well, I think the majority of contemporary Shafi'i scholars recommend using the gold nisab amount to calculate one's zakah in cash. And I do agree with this opinion, and I have written responses and answers about this particular view on the Seekers Guidance Answers Forum. So anyone who wants to get a more detailed idea of this particular concept may visit that particular forum bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And Allah knows best. That said, the opinion still exists that if you have the silver zakatable amount and you wish to pay zakah accordingly, there are scholars who hold that view, and it is a perfectly reasonable view to follow in that regard. But it is certainly a matter of differences of opinion, and we should be tolerant of that at all costs, bi'idhnillah. We move on, inshallah. So point number 3, or the third type of wealth upon which zakah is obligatory, are crops. So footnote number 4 says, the zakah for crops is only on the staple type that people cultivate, dry and store, such as wheat, barley, millet, rice, etc. There is no zakah on fruit except for raw dates and grapes. There is no zakah on vegetables, nor is there zakah on seasonings such as cumin or coriander. It carries on, since the aim in using them is preparation of food, not nourishment. The minimal quantity of zakah, or the minimal quantity on which zakah is payable for crops, is 618.8 kilograms of net dried weight, free of husks or chaff. The zakah for crops that have been watered without effort, as by rain and the like, is 10% of the crops. The zakah for crops that have been watered with effort, such as on land irrigated by ditches, is 5% of the crop, because the factor of the expenditure of irrigation is taken into consideration. One is obligated to pay zakah as soon as one possesses the zakah payable amount of grain, or when the ripeness and wholeness of a zakah payable amount of dates or grapes is apparent. Otherwise, one is not obligated on that. Then we proceed to number 4, which is wealth acquired from business in which 2.5% of the value of the commodity should be discharged. Footnote number 5 states, zakah on trade goods is wajib for anyone who has possessed trade goods for a year, whose value at the zakah year's end equals or exceeds the zakah minimum of gold. I'll just leave it at that. that the trade goods have been acquired through a transaction or received as a gift given in return for something else, or such as an article rented from someone in order to rent them out to others at a profit, or land rented from someone in order to rent it out to others at a profit. And number 4, that at the time of acquisition, the owner intended to use the goods for trade. Tamam. So that was zakah on trading goods. Then number 5, treasure troves. The corresponding footnote is number 6. It says an immediate zakah of 20% is due when one finds a treasure trove that was buried in pre-Islamic time or by non-Muslims, ancient or modern. If it amounts to the zakah minimum and the land is not owned, and then if such a treasure is found on owned land, it belongs to the owner of the land. If found in a masjid or street, or it was buried in Islamic times, it is considered as a lost and found article and will be dealt with accordingly. That is, of course, covered in the bab of mu'amalat, which this text, Safinat al-Naja, does not cover. And then further, the final type of wealth upon which zakah is obligatory is mines. Footnote number 7 states, a zakah of 2.5% is immediately due on 1. The zakah minimum or more of gold or silver, excluding anything else such as iron, lead, crystal, emerald, or other on which there is no zakah, and that's for diamonds as well. Number 2, extracted from a mine located on land permissible for the miners to work on or owned by him. Number 3, that this amount of ore has been gathered by working at the site one time or several times uninterrupted by abandoning or neglecting the project. The zakah is only paid after the ore is refined into metal. So this is an overview of the 6 types of wealth upon which zakah is obligatory. All of them require much more detail than has been presented here. So why are we doing it in this way? Number 1, it is an introduction to the concept. Number 2, it makes us aware that these concepts exist, this type of zakah on these types of wealth exist. And then number 3, that if we are affected, in other words, if we think that we need to pay zakah based on what we just mentioned for these types of wealth, for example, if you are a farmer or you mine or something of the sort, then you know that you need to expand your knowledge in that regard. For the most part, for contemporary Muslims, we are generally only affected by 2 of these 6 types of wealth. And that is number 2, zakah on gold, silver, or money. And then number 4, which is wealth acquired from business or trading stock. For the most part, these are the 2 types of wealth that we need to be most concerned with and that we need to understand thoroughly to ensure that we are fulfilling this pillar of Islam. Now we proceed bi'idhnillah ta'ala with some notes on the zakah of Eid al-fitr. So the zakah of Eid al-fitr is wajib for every free Muslim, male, female or child, provided that one has the necessary amount of food, which is 2.036 kilograms of wheat. But this calculation has been revised by contemporary scholars who measure that it is closer to 3 kilograms of wheat, or in money value thereof, which is not a Shafi'i view but rather a Hanafi view that most contemporary Shafi'is adopt. طيب. Excuse me for that. And then for the day of Eid, for himself and those whom one is obliged to support, what one needs to clothe them, and in excess of one's debt and housing expenses. The second point, the zakah of Eid al-Fitr becomes wajib when the sun sets on the night before the Eid. Then point number 3, the zakah of Eid al-Fitr consists of, again, 3 kilograms of the main staple food of the area in which it is given, of the kinds of crops on which zakah is payable. If the main staple is bread, only wheat may be given. Then the next point, it is permissible to give the zakah of Eid al-Fitr to deserving recipients any time during the month of Ramadan, though the best time is on the day of Eid al-Fitr before the Salah. It is not permissible to delay giving it until after the day of the Eid. That is, one may give it until sunset, and is a sin to delay until after this, and one must make it up. Some more notes. This is about the 8 categories of zakah recipients. So the first category is the faqir, the destitute. This is someone who does not have wealth, or they do have, but the earning is not sufficient to cover their needs. Then you have the miskin, so the fuqara and the masakin. This is miskin, the poor. Someone who has something to spend for his needs, but is not sufficient. So the difference between the first and second is that the first category is destitute, they have practically nothing. And then the poor, they have, but they don't have enough. And then number three, it's the amil, the zakah collector. And there's, of course, strict details about this as well in all of these categories, actually. Then number four, mu'allafatul qulub, those whose hearts are to be reconciled because they are new to Islam, and, supporting them would be of benefit to Islam, basically. Number five, riqab, those slaves who are purchasing their freedom. Number six, those in debt. Number seven, fi sabilillah, those fighting for Allah. People engaged in Islamic military operations for whom no salary has been allotted in the army roster. And then number eight is Ibn Sabil, the traveler in need of money. So in relation to fi sabilillah, many contemporary scholars have expanded this particular category to go far beyond just those fighting for Allah. So in this category, some have included basically any venture that is for the sake of Islam and its expansion. But that is a contemporary issue upon which there's ikhtilaf. So anyone interested in understanding that concept further should visit the more detailed works of study, and Allah knows best. So herein we've covered the 6 types of wealth on which zakah is owed, the zakah of al-fitr, as well as the 8 categories of zakah recipients. Now, we're going to proceed to the next segment of text as well, inshallah, because like I said, this is just an overview. We cannot give the details of this particular bab in this level of study. It's not part of the book, nor is it the intended outcome of this particular level of study. So we proceed to the next bab, where we will learn about establishing the month of Ramadan and how that happens, the 4 conditions of the validity of fasting, as well as the 5 conditions of fasting being obligatory. So moving on, faslun fi thubuti Ramadan. Now we are in the next bab as well, right? So obviously in the more advanced books, the chapter of zakah is much, much longer, right? It's not going to be 2-3 paragraphs. It's going to be probably 100 or 200 pages, depending on the type of work we consult. So, faslun fi thubuti Ramadan. How is Ramadan established? Yajibu sawmu Ramadan. The fasting of Ramadan becomes wajib bi ahadi umuri khamsa, by one of 5 matters. So, let's look at it from, we look at it from the Arabic and the English, inshallah. أحدها, number 1, بكمال شعبان 30 يوما, by completing 30 days of the month of Sha'ban. وثانيها, number 2, برؤية الهلال في حق من رآه وإن كان فاسقا, by the sighting of the crescent moon regarding the one who sees it, وإن كان فاسقا, even if he be a sinner. وثالثها, number 3, بثبوته في حق من لم يره بعدل شهادة, by its establishment through في حق, regarding the one who من لم يره, he did not see it, بعدل شهادة, but he gets a just and reliable testimony that it was seen. ورابعها, number 4, بإخبار عدل رواية موثوق به, by the information of a just the report that comes one's way that is verified, سواء وقع في القلب صدقه أم لا, whether one is satisfied with this person's truthfulness or not, أو غير موثوق به, or one that is not ratified, in وقع في القلب صدقه, if truthfulness is trusted in one's heart. وخامسها, number 5, بظن دخول رمضان, by assuming or thinking, suspecting that Ramadan had entered, bil ijtihad, by way of applying one's intellectual reasoning, في من اشتبه عليه ذلك, regarding one who matters are unclear for that particular person. So now we look at it in a bit more detail, inshallah, considering again that even though the chapter of fasting is slightly more detailed than zakah, it's still very basic compared to other books which you would, of course, study at level 2, level 3, and so forth. So, number 1, on completion of 30 days of Sha'ban. So, when 30 days of Sha'ban finishes, it is automatically Ramadan. So, that's number 1. Number 2, by sighting the moon for the person who sees it, even though he is a fasiq or sinner, because he sees it by himself. So footnote number 1 says, for those who do not see it, it only becomes wajib when the sighting is established by the testimony of an upright witness. Number 3, the testimony of a just person, a non-fasiq. Now when we say non-fasiq, a non-sinner, obviously kullu bani adama khatta'un, all humans are sinners, but fasiq in this sense would mean they openly sin with major sins. So the testimony of a just person, a non-fasiq, for those who do not cite it, footnote number 2 states, the testimony of a single witness that the new moon has been seen is sufficient to establish that the month of Ramadan has come, provided the witness is upright, male, and responsible for the duties of Islam, which excludes boys who have reached the age of discernment but not puberty, and together with the decree of the ruler. Then, number 4, the informing of a just person whose information is reliable, whether the heart is inclined to it being or not, and also with the information of an unreliable source if one is inclined to it being true. So I'll read this again. The informing of a just person whose information is reliable, whether one's heart is inclined to it being true or not, and also with the information of an unreliable source if one is inclined to it being true. So number 4 states, so there's no footnote with number 4. Number 5 says, with the perception that Ramadan has commenced, this is for that person who is doubtful of it. So footnote number 3 states, if it is difficult to learn which month it is, for someone imprisoned and the like, such as someone being held in a dark place who cannot tell night from day, or someone who does not know when Ramadan has come because of being in a land without habituations or people who know when it is, then such a person is obliged to reckon Ramadan as best as he can and to fast it. Such a fast is valid if it remains unknown as to whether the month of Ramadan actually coincided with Ramadan or not, whether his fasting coincided with Ramadan or not, or if it did coincide with it, or if the month fasted occurred after it. Though the month fasted, if it was before the actual Ramadan, then it was not valid and they would have to repeat it. We move on to the next section, inshallah. في شروط صحة الصوم, regarding the conditions of the validity of fasting. شروط صحته أربعة أشياء. The conditions of the validity of fasting are 4 things. إسلام وعقل ونقاء من نحو حيض وعلم بكون الوقت قابلا للصوم. There are 4 conditions for fasting. Number 1 is Islam. It is only valid from a Muslim. Number 2, aql. It is only valid from somebody with sanity. Number 3, niqa'un min nahwi hayd, being free from barriers such as menstruation, nifas, and the like. And then number 4, ilmun bikawnil waqti qabilan lis-sawm, knowledge that it is in fact a suitable time for fasting. Number 1, Islam, footnote number 4 states, a non-Muslim will not be asked to fast, nor would it be valid if he did, though he is punished in the next life for not doing so. Why? Because, we know that the rajih in the madhab is that the disbeliever is duty-bound with the furu', the individual laws of the sharia. But again, this is only for the matters of the year after. In other words, even though they are mukallaf, they are duty-bound with the individual laws of the sharia, it would be invalid for them to do so, to act according to the individual laws in this world, simply because they don't meet the criteria of Islam, right? So they are not mukallaf in that sense. So even though they are not mukallaf in that sense, in the year after they'll still be held accountable for not doing so. So it's a catch, what do they call it? To be stuck in between a rock and a hard place. The evidence of this is from the Quran, in which the inhabitants of Jahannam are asked, ما سلككم في سقر? What has brought you to the fire? قالوا لم نكن من المصلين. We were not of those who prayed. وَكُنَّا نَخُوضُ مَعَ الْخَاعِدِينَ وَكُنَّا نُكَذِّبُ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ. So they mention we were not of those who prayed. We used to indulge in conversations about things we did not know. So all of this you can still say, well, they could just be Muslims that are in Jahannam, or believers who are in Jahannam because they were sinful and they didn't pray. But then they say وَكُنَّا نُكَذِّبُ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ, and we denied the year after. We denied the day of recompense. So because they deny the day of recompense, that makes it clear that these are not believers who are punished in Jahannam, but these are rather disbelievers. Then we go back to the earlier part of the verse in which they state that, look, we were not of those who prayed. So they are also being punished in Jahannam for not praying, even though had they prayed, they would not have been free of the responsibility of prayer because it wouldn't have been valid from them. So this is the general evidence for this matter in the Shafi'i school. So now we continue bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Purity from haid, menstruation, footnote number 5. A woman whose period ends during a day in Ramadan is mustahab to fast the rest of the day, and it is wajib to make up the fast and the fast days prior to it when missed during her period or postnatal bleeding. Okay, and then the final point, knowledge of its appropriate time. That is clear. It must be known that it is Ramadan in order for one's Ramadan fasting to be valid. The next section, Faslun, fi shuruti wujubi sawm, regarding the conditions of the obligation of fasting. Shartu wujubihi khamsatu ashya. The conditions of the obligation of fasting are 5. Islamun wa taklifun wa itaqatun wa sihhatun wa iqamatun. Number 1, Islam, we've discussed this. Number 2, taklifun, being mukallaf, which means to be aqil baligh, sane and at the age of puberty. Number 3, itaqatun, means ability, that one is capable of fasting. There's a footnote there, footnote number 7. Rather, let's go through all of the footnotes collectively. And then number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, sihhatun is health. And number 5 is wa iqamatun, the person must be a muqim, a non-traveler. So looking at the footnotes, we've got corresponding footnote number 6, 7, 8, and 9. The mukallaf, reaching the age of puberty and sanity, footnote number 6. A child of 7 is ordered to fast, and at 10 is beaten. This is lightly, not severely. There's lots of details to this, of course, that we've discussed before. Muru awladakum bis salati wa hum abna'u sab'i sinin. Command your children with prayer when they are at the age of 7. وَاضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءُ عَشْرِ سِنِينَ. Give them a light hiding when they reach the age of 10. وَفَرِّقُوا بَيْنَهُمْ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, and separate between beds. This is a general yardstick in terms of raising children and starting to apply the laws of Islam. It's mentioned specifically about salah, but other wajibat of Islam are, of course, included in that by extension. So the idea is when children reach the age of 7, they should be told and instructed to pray, to fast, to give, to do whatever the Muslim needs to do. But the instruction is a light one. They'll be playful, they will listen sometimes, they will disobey sometimes, and that's fine. When they reach the age of 10, this instruction should become far more strict in the sense that it is now a duty that they must fulfill. And if they don't fulfill, there's a punishment. But the punishment should not be harsh. It should not be abusive. It should never ever be in the form of what leaves marks or causes extreme pain, etc. So that is something that we should observe. And then, of course, this is so that we condition them so they are fully practicing by the time they reach the age of taklif, or 15 lunar years, or whenever it is that they become mukallaf in one of the other understood ways. Then we move on to number 7, that is corresponding to ability. What is taqa, ability? One is capable of bearing the fast. Someone whom fasting exhausts because of advanced years or having an illness from which he is unlikely to recover are not required to fast. And if somebody is of such a state that fasting would cause them harm, then it is wrong. It is haram for them to fast in that way. Then number 8, footnote number 8 corresponds to health, siha. The illness that permits not fasting, being that which fasting would worsen, delay recovery from, or cause one considerable harm, with the same dispensation applying to someone who needs to take medicine during the day that breaks the fast and that he cannot delay taking until night. Footnote number 9. is corresponding to the muqim, the non-traveler. It is permissible not to fast when traveling, even when the intention has been to fast that was made the night before, provided that the journey is at least 80 kilometers one way and that one leaves town before dawn. If one leaves after dawn, one is not entitled to omit the fast. It is preferable for travelers not to fast if fasting would harm them, though if not, then fasting is better. Now we move on to the arkan of fasting. وَأَرْكَانُهُ ثَلَاثَةُ أَشْيَاء. The integrals of fasting are three. نِيَّةُ لَيْلًا لِكُلِّ يَوْمٍ فِي الْفَرْضِ. The intention of fasting made the night before for every day of fasting, the month of Ramadan. Number two, وَتَرْكُ مُفَطِّرٍ ذَاكِرًا مُخْتَارًا غَيْرَ جَاهِلٍ مَعْذُورٍ. To refrain from intentionally doing those things that would break the fast for one who is conscious of his fast and is not ignorant. So in other words, a person who doesn't do so forgetfully or by accident and is not ignorant of the things that breaks the fast. And then finally, number three is wasa'imun, the fasting person. These are considered the basic integrals or building blocks of fasting. So that concludes our lesson here. Of course, if you have any questions in relation to this particular lesson, do forward it. There is possibly and potentially many questions about this. So what I would advise is, before asking a question in the forum, that you perhaps look into our answers service to see if your question has already been addressed there. Alternatively, if you wish to get more details in a more structured manner, I would then recommend that you start registering for the next level of Shafi'i study. Or perhaps, you're ready to take on a more advanced study such as Umdatul Salik or the Reliance of the Traveler, then that would also be good, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So with that said, of course, I remind you once again that this text, this level of text, Safinat al-Naja, is intended to be an introductory study. So there will definitely be gaps in terms of the information that you require or acquire at this stage. So until next time, inshallah, we will probably complete the chapter on fasting, and then perhaps have one or two more lessons to cover Hajj and Umrah, again in an overview manner. I bid you farewell. Jazakumullahu khairan wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Subhanallahi wa bihamdi. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.